Make bread is to do what's called a starter. So this is just regular all-purpose flour, a small amount of that. Then there's yeast. This is regular active dry yeast, and some water. And then we're just gonna mix it together with a fork. Make all the little lumps out of it. We're going to cover it. We're going to cover it and let it sit for at least a half hour or up to overnight in the fridge. Okay, it's been a half hour, and you can see that the yeast has gotten nice and frothy, so we are ready to go. First thing we're going to do is get some wheat starch, put that in our mixer, some tapioca starch. We use tapioca because it actually does a few things. It helps make the loaf a little bit browner. It makes it a little bit more smooth and helps in the softness of the dough and the crispness of the crust. Next we have Metamucil. If you cannot find Metamucil and you use psyllium husk, use half the amount because Metamucil is half psyllium and half sugar. And know that some of the off brands of Metamucil can sometimes add a purplish hue to the bread, which doesn't change the taste, but it does impact aesthetically kind of how it looks. Next we have some xantham gum, and both the Metamucil and the xantham gum serve as binders because there's no gluten in this, or very little gluten in this bread, and they just help hold its shape as the yeast starts to work its magic. And then we've got some salt. Hang on. Okay. And I'm gonna give that a quick mix. Now, since the pandemic, there has been very little instant potatoes in my area, so what I've done is I boiled a potato, and I've used 45 grams of that potato put through a ricer, and then because there's 45 grams in this and it's liquidy or it's more moist because it's not dried out, I've added 30 grams less of liquid. So instead of the 270, it's 240 of rice milk. So that's going in. I'm going to add the honey. The butter. And the rice milk. It goes in. And I'm going to take our starter that we made a little bit earlier. That goes in. As you can see, this is a very wet batter. It's more like a thick pancake or cake batter. What we're gonna do now is let it rest for about 20 minutes so that the liquids can get absorbed by the starches a little bit more, so it becomes pliable so we can shape it. Now, I say 20 minutes. It can be anywhere from 20 minutes to a few hours, depending on if you have something else going on. It's okay to walk away from it at this point, but no more than, I would say, 2 hours. So we'll be back in a few minutes and we'll take a look at what it looks like. Actually, before we do that, let me show you just how liquidy this is. So it does stick, but if I try to do anything with it, it's completely stuck to my hands. So now we'll take a look after we give it that 20 minutes. Okay, it's been 20 minutes, and you can see that the dough is much drier now. It's still quite wet and more wet than a typical high protein bread dough, but it's drier. So now what we're gonna do is really try to get some air in there. And we're gonna wanna make this, instead of being sort of a rough dough, it's going to end up looking silky smooth by the time we're done. So I'm going to put it on, the mixer on, to medium setting for a few minutes. Okay, it's been about 3 minutes, and you can see that the dough is quite smooth now. So it's a nice smooth consistency. Okay, the dough is all mixed up. There's just some wheat starch right here in a cheese grater, a cheese shaker. So I'm just putting some wheat starch down on my workstation. I'm going to get out all of the dough. I get a little bit of wheat starch on my hands, and I'm going to take the dough and I'm going to give it a few kneads. So to knead dough, you just fold it in half and you just push down a little bit with your hand. So you can see that this is sticking a little bit, but not a lot. I should be able to shape it, no problem. So fold in half, push down, fold in half, push down, fold in half, push down. Okay. And you can see it's not really sticking to the surface. And now, have it nice and smooth. And now I want to shape it. Okay. So we want to use a bread pan that is slightly smaller than a standard. This is a standard bread pan, and this is the one that we want to use. So it is a little bit more narrow this way and a little bit shorter. I'm going to grease that. Put our dough in, and we're going to push it so that it's in the corners and can rise nicely. So you can see from here, it's got a good bit of space. I would say at least 3/4 of an inch from the top. And we're going to cover it with plastic wrap, and we're going to find a place for it to rise. So one of the gadgets that I'm a big fan of is the Broad and Tailor proofer. What it does is it provides the perfect temperature and the perfect amount of humidity or moisture for a loaf to rise. So if you're finding that your yeast is fresh and it's active, but your dough is just not giving you the rise that you want, it's worth investing in a proofer like this. So the loaf of bread goes in, the cover goes on, and we're gonna let it rise we're gonna check on it in a half hour and see how it's doing. Okay, it's just been 30 minutes, so I'm gonna take a look at the bread. Sometimes it takes anywhere between 30 minutes and 45 minutes to get the right rise. But if you look here, the bread is probably about an inch over the lid, which is exactly what we're looking for. So hang on one second, let me get rid of this. So what we're gonna do now is we're gonna put a slit in the bread, and we're gonna hope that we get a nice oven rise. So while the bread was rising in the proofer, I preheated my oven, and I put a pan in the bottom, and it has some boiling water in there to create, again, moisture. So hopefully the heat from the oven will cause this bread to rise even more. And because there's some moisture in there, the crust won't form, and it will allow it to get a little bit bigger. Again, this is the bread. So you can see it has a nice rise on it. And we're gonna put it into the oven for 30 minutes. And then we're gonna brush it with some butter, because the butter will help aid in the browning, and let it cook another 15 minutes, and then take it out of the pan and let it go for another 15 minutes. Our 30-minute timer just went off, so let's take a look at the bread. Oh, and it looks beautiful. So you can see that it rose even a little bit more in the oven. Let me take that out. Sorry, hard to do with one hand. There we go. And it's browning a little bit, but let's aid it in the browning. And you see how that slit widened? That's because we got that final oven proof. Brushing some butter, with melted butter on top. And it's going to go back in for another 15 minutes. It's been another 15 minutes. So we had just buttered the loaf, and now it should be browned better. Let's see. Again, hard to take out with just one hand. Up it goes here. And it's browned beautifully. And what we're going to do is still give it another 15 minutes, but not in the pan. So I'm going to take it out of the pan, and then we're going to put it back in the oven for 15. Okay, sorry, I could not accomplish that with one hand. So now it goes back in the oven for 15 minutes. Okay, our loaf is out of the oven, and she is a beauty. So we're just going to put it on a wire rack and let it cool for at least an hour. If you try to cut it too soon, you're going to compress it and it's going to get kind of gummy. So really just let it cool for as long as you can. And then just over here, I'm just going to scan the ingredients in case anyone is looking for them. So we've got the Metamucil, the rice stream, the tapioca flour, also known as tapioca starch, xantham gum, regular Fleischmann's active dry yeast, honey, butter, and wheat starch. And over here is a craft bag. They're fantastic to just have your pre-measured ingredients in there, so that way when you're making a loaf of bread, it makes life a little bit easier. So we're going to come back when it's time to cut this. Okay, our loaf is cooled. It's been about 2 hours, so it's nice and cool now. And we're just going to start slicing. You need to use a serrated knife and have a pretty steady hand. And what I do at this point is whatever isn't going to get eaten tonight goes in a Ziploc bag and gets stored in the freezer for use at another time. I just want you to see. I'll do a close-up of this loaf. Hang on one second. And you can see it's really, it's fluffy, it smells amazing, and it's really nice and soft, and the flavor is fantastic. So I hope you enjoy it, and remember, you might not love to cook, but sometimes you do need to cook for love. Take care, everyone.